Apple has delayed their upgraded LLM-based version of Siri until 2027. Google's Gemini app for iPhones, they added a whole bunch of lock screen widgets. Deutsche Telekom announced that they are building a new Perplexity assistant-powered AI phone. Google beta testing a new AI mode for search.
Can AI turn law students into legal superheroes?
Anthropic raised another $3.5 billion at a $61.5 billion valuation.
OpenAI has released their AI safety paper.
OpenAI committed $50 million in research grants, compute, and API access to next-gen AI.
Chatbot ethics are generative AI companions crossing dangerous ethical lines.
Alibaba's Quinn team released QWQ32B.
Microsoft Dragon medical model.
PhD candidates who were preparing for their committee used LLMs, but they got identical questions from the committee that the ChatGPT.
LA Times has released a new AI policy. Can AI-generated labels and insights rebuild reader trust in the media?
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in the world of artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado. How's it going, Jeff?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Did you watch the Oscars last weekend?
I am embarrassed to say, despite being an LA guy, I did not watch the Oscars last week, but I assume you did.
Oh, of course. I always watch it end to end from the first steps on the red carpet all the way till the closing. But you missed out. It was a great show, very entertaining, and our boy Adrian Brody won despite his AI assist and his Hungarian accent. So there you go, first AI powered winner of Best Actor. Not that he was completely AI powered, but AI
Yeah.
assisted.
AI assisted Hungarian accent doesn't feel easy. I feel like that's a legit, like, little crutch to lean on. You know what I'm saying? The pronunciation of the Hungarian accent, not easy.
That's right. And actually, I will say he maybe could have used an AI assist in making his acceptance speech a little bit more streamlined and concise.
I heard it was like the longest in history or something. Like, he
It
went
was
a long
quite
time.
long. It was quite long, and he even they started doing the music to play him off, and he said, "I've done this before. I know if I keep talking, you'll stop playing the music eventually." And I was like, "Ooh, ChatGPT could have helped you get your point across faster."
Got to go like a debate. Just cut the mic off. I mean, the music is nice cue, but then when the mic goes off, that's all she wrote. You gotta get control of the mics.
That's all she wrote, but it was a good show, so I enjoyed it. What do you got for us this week in AI radar?
It's been a busy week, so let's go through the big announcements through in AI radar. Last week we talked about Amazon announced an upgraded version of Alexa. Unfortunately, this week rumors are that Apple has delayed their upgraded LLM-based version of Siri until 2027. That seems kind of crazy. I
Wow.
feel like you could start today and get it done before 2027, but there you go. They're apparently currently using a fragmented architecture with a bunch of traditional functions that call out to LLMs like ChatGPT when necessary, but are not kind of core to it. And apparently, also the new Apple Intelligence features not as widely used as they'd hoped. So they're doing a kind of complete rethink. It might be a couple years till you get a Siri that actually feels smart.
It's really interesting that kind of they've even said this because what we keep hearing with all these other model development things is the speed of development is getting so much faster and people are getting models out in the wild so much faster. And now we hear Apple come out and say, "You know what, we'll get something out in 2027." What's the deal?
I cannot tell you what the deal is, but you're right. I mean, what occurred to me is like that's longer than it took XAI to build a first rate model from scratch. And all it took XAI was money. And if Apple has anything, they have money. They don't
Yeah.
have to go raise cash from some venture capitalist or private equity firm or bank or debt. Like, they've got cash coming in the door, unbelievable. And so I don't really know what to make of this, but it is fascinating to see that they're seemingly unable. I do think there's a degree to which it'll be interesting to see how Amazon is with Alexa. That the functionality of Siri today holds back their ability. Like, it doesn't do the smart things, but the things it does, like it sets a timer reliably, it sends a text message, it makes a phone call, it tells you the weather. Those are like the five things people actually do with Siri. But if you know how to tell Siri what to do, it does it flawlessly every time. I think the problem with LLMs is they can do a whole bunch of other stuff, but then they're less flawless in doing the things that you do today, and that becomes a bit of an anchor around what they need from the LLM to be able to replace Siri with it entirely, because it has to keep up the level of capability that it has in the basics today. And that's just not obviously true for all the LLMs.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of pressure for Apple because I feel like if they're going to be this far behind, what they need to come out with has to be meaningfully better than all of the other things that have been out in the wild and started to be adopted. And can they meet that bar? Some of the early indicators of the functionality that they say it's going to be able to do, I'm like, I kind of feel like there's already LLMs out there that do that. So what's
Yeah,
the
and
deal?
that are moving quickly. Well,
Yeah.
in the vein of will it be enough, a couple of other related pieces of news. Google's Gemini app for iPhone, so not the Android, but the iPhone app for Gemini. They added a whole bunch of lock screen widgets to make it easier for you get to their AI assistant features for text or video or audio. And so interesting that they're trying to make it easier to access Gemini on iOS and pretty rapidly, I think, improving the Gemini functionality. So Google coming after the assistant on the iPhone element, while Apple seems to be in install mode. And then I'm going to just hop to this one, and we'll do this. Deutsche Telekom announced at the Mobile World Conference. I've always wanted to go to this because it's always in like Barcelona, and I feel like that'd be a fun trip. I've never been, but they are building a new Perplexity assistant powered AI phone that will be revealed later this year, running in an OS they call Magenta AI. But so now you've got Google trying to put Gemini on iOS. You've got Perplexity working with Deutsche Telekom to put out a whole new AI phone based on Perplexity's assistant, and Siri kind of feels MIA.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting, this, perplexity thing, thinking about it. I sort of remember back when the iPhone got released, right? And it was like, there's gonna be a phone with one button, and that seemed totally crazy, and now all of us are so used to having a phone with one button, and this is now there's gonna be a phone with no apps. It's just gonna be, AI powered, you have a discussion, it does what you want, and so if they can build it right, I feel like it could be really transformative in terms of how people are interacting with their smartphone, but we'll see. It has to have, like, really high fidelity in terms of what it can do, so we'll see how that goes.
Perplexity Assistant on Android. I don't have an Android to test this with, but already like can interact with a couple of other apps like Uber and I want to say Yelp or OpenTable to book restaurants and order. So it'll be interesting to see how they build that. It does make me really wonder. Perplexity investing in the phone form factor, but you see things like the Meta glasses coming out. You see the Humane Pen or the Rabbit, and like the question of if I don't have any apps and if voice is my interaction mode, is the phone the slab of glass with a processor and all, is that the thing or is there a new thing? But of course no new thing's really taken off. So interesting bet. I'm sure they're not tying themselves entirely to that, but it is interesting to see them come out with a new phone. We haven't seen a new phone model, and I mean it's been iOS and Android for as long as anyone can think of it, like serious phones. So it'll be interesting to see if they what they do.
Yeah, it will be interesting. Gemini seems to also clearly think it's the phone, right? Because their functionality really leans into that also. And it almost takes, it seems like they're taking some of the functionality that we're seeing in the glasses, but now they're just making it really easy to access on the phone. You don't have to unlock the phone, but it can see your screen. It can use the camera to see what's going on around you. So people really leaning into the smartphone.
Yeah, it's got me. I will say, it's made me debate switching to Android. I've been an iOS guy since I left Google. It's kind of like my first detoxification from the drinking and pouring of the Kool-Aid at Google was to buy an iPhone back when Dave and I first left. And I feel I've never really had any contemplation about switching back to Android since that moment, despite living heavily in the Google ecosystem. iOS has been great and the app's generally better. But as you see these assistants take off, as you see Siri lagging behind, Gemini getting ahead, and you could actually set Perplexity to be the default assistant on an Android phone, and it has much more access to apps because you can give a lot more permissions to Android apps than you can to iOS apps, which is why Perplexity Assistant isn't on iOS. It's really made me start going, maybe Android's the place. I should be there.
Yeah, interesting.
More Google news. They are beta testing a new AI mode for search that turns it into a little bit more of a conversational LLM type experience. Currently on a wait list. I got off it late yesterday.
Me too.
What'd you think? Did you get to try it out?
I did try it out and it felt a whole lot like chat. It was really interesting. It didn't feel like Google, right? You're so used to going to the Google
Yeah.
search bar and having a specific type of interface, and this felt much more chat like than Google like.
Yeah, it did. It does show sources, and so it's a little bit more perplexity-like in that way versus just Chat GPT, where you see kind of where it's drawing the information from. It'll give you much longer answers than like a Google query. But I'm definitely at the point now where I go to Google, not Gemini. I may use this, but Google only if I'm looking for a website. Like if I'm looking for the website of X, I go to Google, and if I'm looking for any other kind of information, I ask one of these assistants instead because it's just so much more useful.
Yeah, I mean, they're a little bit behind, right? Because the chat functionality, I was thinking last night as I was preparing for the podcast, actually, like maybe I should just give this Google thing a spin and all of the research I would normally do in ChatGPT, I'll do here. But the thing it doesn't have that ChatGPT has is the ability to save your projects and your sort of context and history, right? So the strict research, getting information might be useful, but you can get just sort of a deeper analysis and more customized recommendations and that type of thing from ChatGPT because it remembers you and gets to know you. So maybe this will go in that direction too, but at least at its first pass did not feel the same.
It is interesting, you're right, though, to see the differentiation for us as users falling down not along who's got the best model. Is Gemini 2.0, 1.5, Flash, whatever, GPT 4.5 or 4.0? That doesn't seem to be the layer. It's the like, can you remember things about me? Can you bring in the rundown I'm working on and help me research this story that like, can you integrate into other parts of my life? Can you call an Uber for the assistant? Like it's not really the capability of the model, but the way it's exposed and leveraged in context of other things you want to do that is really the differentiator in many cases.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, a couple other quick hit stories for everybody. Anthropic raised another $3.5 billion dollars at a $61.5 billion valuation. I don't understand the valuation. I'm just going to be frank. Like I had somebody call me and go, would you invest in one of these valuation rounds? And I go, I use the tools, but I would not invest at 61 and a half. It just feels really tough to me for how they justify that in revenue. But there you go. Anthropic raising another 3.5 billion. Man, I remember when billions were kind of exits, not raises, but we've entered a new era.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy big raise, and I had the same reaction at first too of like how is that value going to get recouped? But I will say one thing that Anthropic is really great at is leaning towards the sort of safety and privacy, which I think really gives them a competitive edge in the sort of enterprise selling B2B compared to some of the other more consumer brand type of things. So, if I was going to bet on one of them returning a lot of value, I think I would probably bet on Anthropic, but we'll see what plays out.
Interesting. We've said for a while that ChatGPT's value may be in the consumer brand and the consumer facing product. They may, though they started as a research lab. That it's interesting that it does in some ways leave open an opening for the API backend LLM for enterprise that maybe Anthropic's going to step through.
Yeah.
All right, OpenAI had to have our OpenAI news here. Committed $50 million in research grants, compute, and API access to what it's calling Next Gen AI, a consortium of 15 research institutions, so mostly universities. I've got a list, but I don't know if we want to read them, to tackle high impact challenges. So, like, we're thinking about real use cases in the world. Like, how do we take ChatGPT or LLMs and use them in healthcare, as we've discussed, or education, or government, like real world use cases? Kind of putting $50 million sounds like a lot, but if you realize it's really just free access to certain OpenAI tools, it's not a terribly difficult amount of money for people raising in the billions to put out there. But interesting to see them really investing in the live use cases that are exciting and not just in partnership with a bunch of external, institutions. Everybody from Caltech at the Cal State system, University of Oxford. I got to get my British accent for that, and Boston Public Library was an interesting one in there. But a whole bunch, like 15 institutions. That was an interesting announcement.
Interesting.
And then our last item for the AI radar, Alibaba's Quinn team released. I can't believe I'm gonna say this. QWQ32B, a new reasoning model that leveraged reinforcement learning, as we've talked about. But the key thing here is it's something like 20x smaller and cheaper to run than DeepSeek R1. So we came in like a couple weeks ago, DeepSeek R1, so much smaller, so much cheaper, yet just as good. Now this is like up to 90% cheaper than OpenAI's model, cheaper even than DeepSeek R1. So just more data points on that curve, that whatever comes out that's expensive and hard and fast, or expensive and large and difficult to run, is going to come out almost as capable with cheaper and smaller and faster to run pretty quickly. It's just kind of unbelievable how that just seems to continuously happen to any cutting edge model.
It is unbelievable, and also to the first point you made, cheaper, faster, smaller, but Siri's gonna get upgraded in 2027. Like, man, all these other companies seem to be moving a lot more quickly.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. A lot of people moving quickly. All right, Annie, out of the radar and into the wild. Where are we seeing AI in the real world these days?
Into the wild. Jeff, do you wanna talk about protein folding?
No, I don't want to talk about. We talked a lot about protein folding, and I still don't understand it. Can we talk about something else?
I am so glad you don't want to talk about protein folding because I have a different announcement for you this week. And it is still a medical context use Microsoft Dragon medical model. And so, what this model does is it actually is an AI assistant for clinical use rather than sort of research use for doctors. And what it is the doctors can bring this tool in when they're seeing patients. It can help, it listens to ambient noise around them, it can transcribe notes, it can help speed up doctor efficiency on things like writing orders and making notes in the person's medical record so that they can focus more on the patient care and less on sort of the administrative burden of all the things that they have to do to be compliant with all of their hospital policies and whatnot. So this is a very interesting real world use case of helping speed up, the treatment of people and not just the research that we've been talking about so much in terms of all of the protein folding and genetic research.
Such a great use case for the just general white collar work. And I mean, if you talk to any physicians, and my wife's a physician, so I talk about this a lot, like the amount of administrative overhead like the percentage of their time that they spend seeing patients and treating patients versus like typing up notes, calling a pharmacy, writing some letter to get approval for some medication to be, insurance covered or whatever. It's like an unbelievable drag on our overall healthcare system and on patient care. It just slows down. That's why it takes so long to see a doctor or whatever else. So it's pretty cool to see them actually deploying it in this context and leaning. I think they leaned into, they called it Dragon Copilot because Microsoft is just going to own the Copilot name as their AI tool name. But it was a pretty cool set of workflows and a use case for this in the real world.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. The one reaction that I had, and maybe we need to bring your wife on here as a guest appearance sometime so I can pick her brain on it. But I was curious about whether there's going to be concern about the picking up ambient noise around you in what is traditionally a very private setting, a discussion between you and your doctor, and if that is going to be something that where there's like a creepy factor that people experience of like when I talk to my priest or my doctor or my therapist, I don't really want an AI listening. But it can speed the doctor up. Just do you have a perspective on that?
I think people will get over that pretty quickly. I mean, there have been startups for a little while that have used Google Glass or kind of glasses, not for AI, but they've actually live brought in a transcriptionist from a low cost area to take notes in real time and do some of the work that Microsoft is talking about with an LLM. Just pull up your medical records. Hey, what were your latest pressure tests? So you just have it read to you, and actually have them taking notes on the patient interactions. So that's been happening a little bit anyway. And some doctors bring nurses in with them to do some of this work, depending on in the more high end specialties where they can afford to have a second person in the room to take the notes, so the doctors don't have to do that. So I think people will get over that concern as long as they know what's going to go. As long as the privacy of the medical records itself is maintained, and that AI is really just like grabbing it and putting it in the medical record and being done. I think people will be okay with it. It's my take.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about the two-way street that you just mentioned. Like right now, like I read about it and thought about it in the context of gathering information from the patient visit and using it to build the file or the medical history. But that second way street is also super interesting of being able to give information back to the provider because we no longer live in a world where there's, deep relationships between you and your doctor and they know you really well. So because they have so many patients, right? So there's probably easy to forget context or forget some of the history, but having an AI be like, "Hey, remember this, that, or the other thing about this patient that's useful in this context." That's a really interesting use case that Copilot will probably be able to bring.
Well, moving on from one of our favorite topics, AI and healthcare, let's get to AI and education, which is another. And this is not a news story, but I read it and it seems so practical for our listeners that I wanted to share this, which was some PhD candidates who were preparing for their committee to defend their thesis used LLMs. And they used LLMs in an interesting way, which is they actually gave the backgrounds and writings of the various committee members,
Mm.
gave their thesis to the chatbot, and then had them basically role play the defense. Like, what kind of questions might I get asked? Who would ask this? What would this person might ask? And the review from some of these PhD candidates was that they got identical questions from the committee that the Chat GPT, they were using Chat GPT, had come up with to ask them based on understanding who the committee members were. So I thought that was just a fascinating use case of an LLM in education at a very high level, at the PhD level, but not to like do my homework or review my thesis. Like, help me prep for my defense by guessing what these people might ask me. It's fascinating.
Oh, I love that. And I think there's so many things like this that people could use every day. For instance, like preparing for a job interview. What a great thing you can do to practice with your LLM preparing for a job interview. Or who's going to here's the person that's going to interview me. Here's the company that they work for. Here's their role. All of that type of stuff. Let's role play that. I feel like that's maybe not as high stakes as defending your thesis, but still pretty important and be pretty cool.
I agree. What I mean, I just came to my mind negotiating anything with anybody, right? Pop it in there. Here are the things, difficult HR conversations where you go, I don't know how this employee is going to react if I give them tough feedback. Like, role play
Yeah.
it, man. Parenting, my kids. What was my 15-year-old son going to say when I say this to him?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
That's I've never thought to use it with my kids. You've said that before, and it's such a good idea. I need to try that out. I also have tried using it preparing for like a big presentation and kind of not had it debate with me or
Mm.
practice the feedback, but just tell me what different audience members might think about my content, right? And say like, "Oh, this joke might not land with a lot of people. It's so nichey," or "This one really will land with your audience because it's a bunch of nichey people who will, appreciate it," that type of thing. So, it's really useful for those types of work outputs.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that one because it just felt so practical, like a thing you could do and use the tools for today. And I think one of the key lessons is aiming for a lot of context for the model, like uploading the writings of these board members that you could actually they could pretend to be or take on the persona of these different kind of characters, if you will, in that role. I thought was a really interesting example of how you get the most out of these tools. And that role playing use case is just use it all the time. I actually even had my kids just upload some of their the stuff they're working on, or just the topic. Like we're working on transitive versus intransitive verbs. Can you quiz me on it? And it'll play the role of a teacher and just quiz and correct you when you're wrong and give you the reason why and keep going. And a super useful way to use these tools every day.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think I'm gonna have a homework assignment for all of my staff to practice their next presentations for, the board or executive committee with chat first and see how that goes and get the feedback and see if that can
Make sure
sort
you
of
get those profiles of the board members in the chat forum so they know how to
yeah.
prep it.
Exactly. Well, our last story today for AI in the wild: AI making legal AI better. So, question here: can AI turn law students into legal superheroes? A groundbreaking trial at top law schools reveals AI not only boosts productivity but also enhances the analytical quality of complex legal tasks. So, this was a really interesting study conducted across University of Michigan, excuse me, and University of Minnesota, where they basically took 6 different tasks. They had 2 of the tasks performed with no AI assistance at all, so just human methods. They had 2 tasks performed with AI preview, which is of course a reasoning model, and then they had 2 performed with Vincent AI, which is a RAG model, retrieval augmented generation tool. And then they sort of compared the outputs of these things. So again, like just to for listeners to sort of recap the difference between regular AI versus reasoning versus RAG, you can think of I asked ChatGPT for this analogy, so here you go. But regular AI is like your smart friend who knows a lot of interesting things, but they might not always be up to date on the latest news. Your yeah, that's your Jeff Keltner. Your reasoning model is your sharp colleague who's like really great at logical puzzles and deep analytical thinking, but doesn't necessarily keep up on everyday trivia. And then your RAG model is your trivia friend. That's your librarian, right? That's the friend who knows
Hmm.
exactly where to get the most current information, but they might not have it memorized and they might not think deeply about it, but they can retrieve it. So those were the sort of different tools that were used here, and both tools, both the reasoning models and the RAG models, greatly enhance the sort of output, both in terms of time and also quality, somewhere between 34% and 140% gains as measured in their, analysis that they put out. So super interesting and promising for the future of legal research for the legal profession.
Yeah, this was really fascinating to me that you saw. I mean, the fact that we're using now a reasoning model and a RAG model. Independent, they don't have a reasoning RAG model that went through this test yet that combines these two capabilities. But adding those to a standard AI tool actually both improve the quality of work beyond a typical AI tool and beyond a non-AI assisted, law student's execution, which tells you a lot about how these, seemingly smaller technical developments may play out as pretty important for real world use cases of these AI technologies in industry.
It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. But one of the things that I'm always thinking, in the future, and I think in the short term future, I can see a world where legal research becomes much more efficient, and some of the work that we have right now that are done by sort of entry level legal folks that are doing a lot of the research based work can be automated by AI over time and be more efficient. But then what you get on top of that is you need the really deep experts to sort of analyze and assess the output and apply it. And the question becomes like, after that, how are we going to continue to build the real deep human experts if that traditional path for how they're built today, which is like slogging through the entry level research phase to get to the expertise, how are we going to keep pumping those out if AI replaces some of those more entry level tasks? So I don't know the answer to that. Curious if you have, since you are my friend who knows a lot about a lot of things, do you have a perspective on that?
But it's often wrong and makes things up. That's the part you forgot. So that's maybe it's wrong or made up. I worry about this generally. I mean, I think it's the same rough problem we see in schools. When I talk to students who are going, why would I write a 5 paragraph essay as a middle schooler? Chat will do a better job. And I'm kind of like, yeah, the world doesn't need a better 5 paragraph essay on whatever topic. Like the output is actually not important. It's learning the skill of generating the output that I need you to have. And you need to have that because the next level and the next level require you to have this foundation. and it can be hard for them to see versus like, I'm a sixth grader. I feel like my job is to like get a good grade on the homework and ChatGPT, if I just ask ChatGPT to do it, it will get me a pretty good grade. And I think this is going to be a general societal problem of how do we structure our learnings or our capabilities or our jobs in our schools in such a way that we can build the foundational skills. I mean, but it is, I think we've been doing this for generations. And it's the same thing we had with math. Like, why do I learn to add and subtract? I just have a calculator. And yet we all still learn how to do basic quick math in our heads, but we're also probably a lot slower at, if you ask me to do long division, I'm probably slower than people were 40 years ago before, the calculators were as prevalent at doing long division because I just don't do it as much, but I know how it works. So we'll see how that happens. But it's a little harder in the professional context to understand like how far can we keep having you learn and do things that are not actually producing value in terms of the output. You're kind of mimicking what an LLM could do for cheaper just so you learn. I don't there does become a level which maybe we just don't get there anymore. It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is a tough question. It's certainly something that I think a lot of companies are going to have to wrestle with in the upcoming years. So
Absolutely. Companies, schools, people in their professional and personal lives.
that's right. Well, speaking of personal and professional lives, let's move on to AI alignment. I have some pretty interesting topics here that impact all of us. So the first is AI safety. OpenAI has released their AI safety paper, and they have a somewhat different approach than what we've seen from some of the competitors. So let me give you sort of the quick rundown. Basically, their approach builds upon things they've said in the past, so it's same sort of context of things they've said in the past, but really leaned into more of a iterative approach where you are developing your safety protocols in response to the actual tooling that your model is capable of, and that there is a lot of sort of human oversight and human involvement in this sort of safety practice. So a little bit more leaning into the human collaboration and iterative process relative to what they've said before. And it's also a little bit different from some of what we've heard from their competitors. So now actually all of the big guys have come out with their safety standards. And I would summarize it as, OpenAI is leading with this very human-centric collaborative approach. Anthropic has emphasized their constitutional AI, where they have sort of an ethically guided rule set. Meta has said that they're moving towards a more open source model where they're sort of just publishing all of their actual tools about it. And then, of course, we've already talked in the last couple of weeks about XAI, Elon having the seek the truth model. So those are
Maximally truth seeking.
maximally truth seeking. So those are the frameworks that we've seen put forward. Do you have a perspective, or what's your thought on OpenAI's viewpoint here?
It was interesting because their shift in approach to this more iterative approach seems to be tied to a shift, at least publicly, in their perspective on how AGI will come about, which is not kind of like, I think there's been a lot of this, we're going to hit the moment like model whatever 5.5 or 6 or 7 is going to be the thing. And then the world changed. There's one point in time we go from not AGI to AGI, and the world is totally different and she'll never be the same again. That was kind of the mindset, and that was why they're going. If this is the one, we've got to like make sure it's not going to do bad things before we release it. And now they're kind of going, well, it'll probably just come in small spurts over time, just slowly get better and better. We won't really be able to put our finger on when the super intelligence or general intelligence moment comes. So we should just put it out in the wild and see what happens and respond to that. And it's a pretty different belief about how this technology will evolve and develop and manifest than I think they had. And then what caused all the boardroom and consternation around the launch of ChatGPT was really around this like, are we putting things in the wild too fast to see what people do in a way that's going to like be really bad if we're not used to doing it slowly when the real AGI moment comes? So that seems like a pretty dramatic philosophical shift in how they think about AI and AGI, which I found as interesting as the details of like the kinds of failure and the principles they use. Is this like, hey, we just don't think it's going to be like a moment in time thing that we got to prepare for. We're just going to like kind of let it slowly build and see where it goes.
Yeah, well, and I think it harkens back to the what did Sam Altman say in that tweet where he's like, we're close to the I can't remember the words he chose, but basically like we don't know what side we're on of this. And I think that is
Yeah,
how it will be with AGI. We don't actually know. It's not like there's going to be some big aha moment. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and I like that they moved in this direction. And I often have this conversation not with generative AI conversations, but with more predictive AI conversations with regulators in the context of some of the model building we do. And the point I always try to make is we're here, like as a world, we need to get here. And if you regulate for here at like the end state, we
We
won't
won't get
ever
there.
get there because we can only get there one step at a time, and you will prevent us from actually taking any steps forward. And I think we've started to see some of the same parallel play out in how people are thinking about regulating or setting policies around generative AI too, where they're like, well, you have to make sure that it can't launch a nuclear weapon. Well, we're nowhere near that being a problem, right? So like if everybody has to pause and figure out how to solve that problem when it's not actually a problem that exists, it'll be a huge detractor from iterating on things that it can actually do, right? And also
Yeah.
putting in place safety standards for things that risks that are actually realized today. So anyway, I liked this approach. I think it makes a lot of sense.
It's interesting. Your comment reminds me of they were asking some of these models if they would misgender someone in order to prevent a nuclear war, and I went, well, in what context is that question relevant to the LLM's deployment? Like, if we put it in a world where it's negotiating with the trans individual, and if it misgenders them, they're going to like launch nuclear weapons. Like, I don't understand that being a reasonable bar for how the LLM can and can't screw up. Given that it's just not, it's a fair thing to ask and try and iterate on, but it's not a good reason to be like, oh my god, is it can't start a nuclear war. There were two parts of this that I really wanted to get your take on, because I think it makes it one of them. The first being because there's a section when they talked about there being human values and ethical principles that they wanted to build into the model, and it just puts them in this position of defining human values and ethical principles, which I don't think are universally agreed upon around the world where OpenAI is used. And so that being in the position of trying to be the arbiter of what are the right human values and what are the right ethical principles to build into a model, that's a pretty it feels like a very difficult place to be, particularly in how fraught, even just in the United States, but start looking across the broader world. There's not real agreement on what those are.
I agree that there's not agreement, but I think that the point that somebody should be thinking about this and actually putting a point of view out so that they can start the discourse is really important because in general, I think that the place we need to build towards is having those more philosophical conversations about this. And right now, people are trying to have two sort of narrow rule based conversations like, should they misgender you or not? Well, to your point, does that really matter? Right. Like, there's much more higher order things that we should be talking about. And so, at least saying, hey, we're going to put a stake in the ground, like, maybe that'll be right or wrong, but at least it'll start a conversation, which I think is a good forcing function. It's a hard place for a specific company to be because obviously we've talked before in the past about, companies have shareholders and they have other stakeholders beyond just like global humanity, but at least somebody's bringing up the topic, right? Which is I think a good thing.
I think the other question that occurs to me is how much do these principles, whether and to your point, particularly if they're implemented vis-a-vis government regulation that actually limits the behavior of companies, but even if they're internal regulation, like my guess is there are companies in China or Russia that are trying to build these kind of models that don't have a desire that they follow any kind of human values or ethical principles. I mean, there are people with very different sets that are probably not going to limit their development. And so I do worry a little bit that we cut off our nose to spite our face, the kind of thing where you end up preventing your models from doing things, but also that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to prevent models in the world from being able to have the kinds of behaviors or harms that you're worried about preventing in your models. And we should be preparing, at least at a government level, for the reality that somewhere models will have that, even if they're not our homegrown models. And then how do we deal with cybersecurity being powered by AI, cyber attacks being powered by AI, even if like having OpenAI decide not to do it is different than saying there won't be a model in the world that will. And it's just interesting to think about where this puts you vis-a-vis the space of innovation to be ahead in the models and your real ability to prevent harm broadly, given that the models, OpenAI or no American company is the only arbiter of or provider of great foundational models at this point.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think, like, this is, people have criticized OpenAI for, like, "Hey, your approach here is too philosophical and black box, we don't know what's going on underneath the surface," and then there's the flip side of, someone like Meta who's made it more open source, and that's actually kinda risky when you think about it because to your point, there's model developers in other places who can take these, and they can use that open source information to do nefarious things, and so, uh there's criticisms, pros and cons for all of these different approaches, but I think that OpenAI, like that, it's a hard place to be in where it's like we want to be transparent, but we don't want to be so transparent that it puts us at risk relative to there's other people and jurisdictions and model developers in the world who maybe don't have the same democratic ideals that we believe in, and they believe in
Mhm.
something different and they would use it for harm. And so how do we manage that risk while also trying to be transparent and truth seeking? That is a hard balance to strike.
Well, it makes me glad I'm not a policy, or ethics person at one of these companies because those are difficult conversations to have and decisions to make, I think.
Well, speaking of difficult decisions, I got another one for you.
All right, hit me.
All right, let's talk chatbot ethics. Are generative AI companions crossing dangerous ethical lines? So, this is our second sort of ethical conversation of the day. MIT Technology Review has uncovered some startling evidence of AI chatbots resembling underage celebrities engaging in sexually charged conversations, highlighting deep vulnerabilities in AI moderation. So this is like a pretty interesting ethical debate to have about how much you regulate chatbot use, companion use. So some sort of background for people who don't know, right? There's these different Botify and character AI, et cetera, where a person can create an AI that is customized to them to be a companion and either have a discussion, sometimes engage in sexually explicit interactions. There's been some criticism that some of these chatbots will make deep fakes of celebrities, but portrayed as underage celebrities in sort of compromising positions. Um, so that's the question: is like these are these tools a useful thing? Are they dangerous for humanity? Is there some good that can come of it? Is it all bad? What should the guidelines be? Who should be in charge of regulating it? Hard questions to answer.
Yeah, do you have any answers for it? It is a very tough discussion and question because certainly there's things that are obvious like underage sexually charged conversations probably not good. Deep fake impersonating, famous people probably not good. But then there's the broader question of like, in an age of increasing loneliness, are these chatbots a pro or a con? Do they cause more loneliness to happen? Can they be great companions for people that are productive and positive? It's a very hard line to draw and to figure out what the right answer is.
It is, and I mean, you asked me if I have an answer. I have no answer, but lots of opinions, and I think that that's where a lot of people are, right? Of like, I don't know what the right answer is because I think there's definitely like pros and cons. When you just said this, obviously bad, definitely agree with that. But there's definitely an argument on the other side where people would say, well, maybe if it prevents sort of real world crime, maybe
Mhm.
there's some benefit there as well. But then there's the other question of, but would it normalize this type of activity in a way that we weren't comfortable with? Again, I don't know the answer, but I did watch a movie that, I a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned it actually last week, this creepy movie, and it was called Companion, and it was basically, like, imagines this future of you have, like, a humanoid robot that, can do these types of things and is a companion robot, and this movie is very much about what could go wrong. The sad thing as I watched it is I was like, "This doesn't even feel like it would be that distant in the future that this is possible,"
Mm.
and it made me feel very uncomfortable. I did not like it at all.
Well,
So
maybe we'll just lean into that as one part of the answer, which is, I've been a sci-fi fan for years, and in any number of forms, and my sons have followed me somewhat down that path. But I feel like one of the great benefits of art in general, in science fiction in particular, is its ability to cause you to grapple with these questions. I mean, I Robot asked this question decades ago, right? When Isaac Asimov first wrote it before it became a Will Smith movie and whatever. And I think it does allow us to engage with this without the reality being here yet, but to kind of have real discussions about what is the right ethical choices and how do we feel about that movie. Her, very similar, right? About someone who not a humanoid robot but a human voice, maybe the prototypical voice now for AI chatbots. Everybody wants to sound like Scarlett Johansson from Her. But like, what is the ethics of a human having that kind of interaction with an AI entity, and what does that look like from the AI entity's perspective? So maybe art will help us find our way through the difficult ethical questions, because I think it's one of the few ways we can really grapple with those questions in a more tangible way.
Okay, well, I love that. Art can help us through so many things, and I think that that is a very good point. Art can help us through ethical questions. Well, my last tidbit for you here is actually journalism related. So, LA Times has released a new AI policy Question here is, can AI generated labels and insights rebuild reader trust in the media? So, what the LA Times has essentially rolled out is they use AI to tag articles that are maybe not in the opinion section, but come with a very opinionated sort
Mhm.
of leaning towards them, right? So, actually disclosing this is not pure fact based, but there's a lot of opinion or perspective that's built in here, and labeling that in one way, calling it voices, and then also the ability for you to then look at insights to say, well, what's the other side of the argument? What are other perspective or voices that might be heard on this topic? So I think it's a super interesting idea. Seems like, as many things related to AI, it's a little bit controversial.
Sure.
There's, one side of the argument says this is great. It's great to be transparent with readers so they know, like, this is not just an echo chamber. Here's all of the arguments that could be put forward. And then, the other question is whether it would degrade people's trust in the media if they start seeing how much of it is actually opinion based versus fact based. So it'll be super interesting to see how readers actually react to this. You are a LA guy. You're going to be
I'm
a
an LA guy. I'm
early
an LA
adopter.
Times subscriber,
Yeah.
so I will have to start reading. There's two things I really like about this. I mean, and we should say that the LA Times making bold moves, like the Washington Post, owned by a billionaire, not as famous as Jeff Bezos, but Patrick Soon-Shiong, an LA-based guy who bought the Times. But the two things I find interesting is a this is a kind of capability that only really exists in a digital delivery. Like if you think about the physical paper, it's very hard to put these things in there and click for deeper and expand. But you can really leaning into a digital first way to kind of tag content or let you engage with content that might have multiple perspectives, I think is really good. I think calling out, we've all known that the op-ed page was opinion of some sort. The opinion page certainly is opinion of some sort, a particular stance, but calling that out and providing counterweight, counterbalance, I think is really interesting. My understanding is there have been some kind of missteps on this, people questioning exactly how it's worked, what it's called out, what's been tagged, but in the newsroom seems to be generally unhappy with it. But I actually think there's a real opportunity for this to work and to be, to be honest about what's out there, to not force a paper to try and be some pure arbiter of fact. I mean, that doesn't really work because the fact not you have to put some context and analysis around the facts for them to make any sense to anybody and to be useful and relevant to you. So I like it. I'm hopeful that it works well, but certainly interesting to see these billionaire owned papers exploring, pushing the boundaries of how they try to rebuild trust with readers in a new way versus kind of continuing on the path, which has led to a pretty steep decline, to be frank, and trust in the media generally.
I love it. I think this is going to be very useful. I hope more follow suit, but we'll see.
We'll see how it goes. I'll have to start. I usually read my stuff in like a reader app. So I'll have to start opening the LA Times to get my direct take on this and see some voices and some insights and see what I think. But interesting direction. I think very optimistic that this can be a good part of building more trust in what I think are really important media institutions.
That's right. Well, great to see you, Jeff. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you next week.
Yeah. Have a great weekend, Annie. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.